there, welcome once again to the Dukascopy TV studio. I'm Ben Jones. Alongside me is Philip Best, a fund advisor and European specialist from Argos Investment Management. Philip, once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Delighted.
Now, can you begin very generally by talking about the situation for small companies in Europe at the moment?
Yeah, I think what's interesting over the past few years since we had the financial crisis and what's now become known as the Great Recession is that on the whole, companies have tended to get their act together, whereas governments haven't, or at least some governments haven't. So the general environment for smaller companies across Europe has actually been very good. Plus, the other thing to remember is that small companies in Europe tend to be incredibly international. And, we're sitting here in a studio in Switzerland, and it's worth remembering that, Switzerland is actually a tiny country, but with a bunch of companies that punch way above their weight in terms of size. So I think it's always worth remembering that, Europe, just because a company is small in Europe, doesn't mean that it's not international. And those international opportunities, whether it's in developing markets or in geographical diversification, give them fantastic opportunities.
Okay, now, why does your organisation focus on companies that are arguably ignored or not considered by other organisations? What benefits do you see here? Well,
one of the things as well that's very interesting is that when we're talking about quoted, so listed European companies, there are about a total of about 8,300 companies that are quoted on the stock markets across Europe. Now, out of those 8,300 companies, over 5,000 have a market capitalization, so stock market size, if you like, of less than 100 million euros. So, that's a huge percentage. That's 5 out of 8 companies are not even what you would call small companies. Actually, you could even call them what's called microcaps. So those type of companies tend to be where we're looking because these are the wonderful little companies that will maybe grow into fantastic successes later on. And every big company, it's always worth remembering, every big company started as a small company at some stage. So we like to dig around in the world of really, let's say, ignored companies because they're too small to interest people.
Okay, so why do you think other organisations do ignore these companies, and do you think this will potentially change in the future?
I think it's partly because people feel that investing in small companies is risky because, a lot of people can remember back to the times of, the dot-com boom followed by crash, and a lot of people had a lot of wealth wiped away in those days. And people just have a suspicion that a small company is going to be less stable, maybe more at risk to a recession. And so the idea of something small is a little bit frightening, which isn't necessarily the case, by the way, because if you take a company with a sound business model and a solid balance sheet, then you're actually not taking any more risk. The other reason is quite simply that small companies tend to not attract the interest from the banks and the broking community because those institutions tend to live basically one way or another off commissions. And, it's obviously much better to get a trading order in 100 million euros worth of Nestle than it is to get in, a couple of million euros worth of some tiny small cap company in Switzerland or France. And as a result, that means that these companies are what I call under the radar screen. And it's actually possible to find what we call orphan stocks, which are stocks where they basically aren't being followed by brokers because it's not economically worthwhile for those brokers. And so as a result, nobody really knows much about them. And the fact that nobody knows much about them often means that they're misvalued. So that's the opportunity, if you like. And so that's where we scratch around.
Fantastic. Philip, once again, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching. Do make sure you keep clicking back to Dukascopy TV as we'll be bringing you plenty more updates and exclusive interviews. Bye for now.